Japan's most important economic partner in modern history has always been the United States. The US has been an important export market for Japan. It is amongst the reasons why its most famous businesses like Toyota, Sony, and other major companies have been raking in billions of dollars ever since their inception, because the world's biggest consumer market, which is the United States, has been buying them. Furthermore, it is also known that the United States has been exporting their goods to Japan, which has helped the Asian economy. They have provided the necessary goods ranging from raw materials to high-tech equipment. Here's a graph on Japan's exports by country in 2000. Here you can see where they sell their goods. In that year, they exported over $482 billion, and over $139 billion of which went directly to the United States. That is a share of over 28.9%. This is a major reason as to why Japan rose as a global economic powerhouse, as they were exporting so much of their goods globally, pushing their companies to become global winners. Likewise, here's another graph on Japan's imports by country. For the very same year, Japan had imports of over $349 billion, and the largest of which is the United States, with over $67.5 billion worth of imports. This, as you can see, really shows just how important the United States is to Japan. And it is important to know that it's not just for the year 2000. It's for many years during the second half of the 20th century. But as we shall see, everything will change in just 10 years. Here's a graph on Japan's largest export market in the year 2010. Here, you can see a huge shift. In that year, Japan had exports of over $756 billion, and $144 billion of which went to China, while $115 billion went to the United States. Of course, it's a small difference, but the change that China had undergone from 2000 to 2010 shows impressive growth. Here's an updated graph on the year 2022. Here you can see that the difference shows that the United States is ahead, but by only $2 billion. But for imports, China is far, far ahead when you compare it to the United States. As you can see here in this graph, for 2022, Japan had imports of over $819 billion, with over $178 billion coming from China alone, and the United States accounting for half of that of China at $79.5 billion. So, as you can see, China is now one of the most important economic partners of Japan. Arguably, as you can see from their imports, they may actually be the most important economic partner. With this, however, a lot of challenges seem to come out. These challenges ranges from dependence on a single economic partner to geopolitical tensions. Let's talk about these one by one, starting with the issues of being too dependent on a single economic partner. As we mentioned earlier, Japan's increasing reliance on China for imports, especially in critical sectors like electronics, automotive components, and machinery, creates a vulnerability in its supply chains. For example, if there were any disruptions caused by trade disputes or even a pandemic, it could severely impact Japan's manufacturing industries, which rely heavily on just-in-time production systems. This overdependence limits Japan's flexibility to diversify its sourcing and increases its exposure to risks stemming from China's domestic policies or global economic fluctuations. Back in the 2010s, there was an issue about the Senkaku Islands. It was a defining moment that showcased how geopolitical tensions could directly impact economic relations. In 2010, a Chinese fishing boat collided with a Japanese Coast Guard vessel near the disputed Senkaku Islands, Diaoyu Islands in China. This incident led to a significant diplomatic standoff. This led China to impose restrictions on rare earth exports to Japan. Here's a graph on the share of rare earth imports coming from China from the years 2000 to 2010. Data from the United Nations Comtrade database. Here you can see that Japan was one of the world's most heavily reliant on rare earth imports from China, representing a 78.3% share. This would then mean that if there were any problems, restrictions, or supply chain disruptions, it would cause havoc to some Japanese businesses. That is because rare earths are critical for the production of high-tech goods, including semiconductors, electric vehicles, and advanced machinery. Without these materials, it would be nearly impossible for Japan to sustain its position as a leader in high-tech industries. This heavy reliance left Japan exposed to the political and economic decisions of China, which could use its dominance in rare earth exports as leverage in geopolitical disputes. Then, disaster struck as China went on to impose restrictions on the export of rare earth elements to Japan following the Senkaku Islands incident. This decision created immediate chaos in Japan's high-tech and manufacturing sectors. Industries dependent on rare earths for producing semiconductors, electric motors, and batteries faced delays and cost increases. Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda, heavily reliant on these materials for hybrid and electric vehicles, were forced to explore alternative sources and strategies to mitigate the impact. Here's an updated graph on Japan's rare earth import share. As you can see, it is now very different from the years 2000 to 2010. Today, Japan has become much less reliant on this critical material from China. But as you can see, this shows the pitfalls of being too reliant on China. It is what makes us wonder whether Japan's reliance on China is beneficial for them in the long term, or if it would make them more vulnerable to future crises. Another industry that got hurt was the automotive sector. Here's a graph on Toyota's sales in China, including Hong Kong and Macau, data from Toyota. Here you can see that every year, Toyota sales to China were always rising. But from 2011 to 2012, there's a slight decrease. It's a small decline, but there were months in these years where Toyota's China sales had fallen dramatically. For instance, in September of 2012, Toyota saw sales fall by half, as reported by many news articles. Some reports out there stated that this was driven due to the so-called boycotts from the Senkaku Island dispute. Likewise, we also saw a sharp decline in tourism. Here's a graph on the annual visitors from China to Japan, data from the Japan National Tourism Organization. Here you can see that by the later months of 2012, the tourism arrivals to Japan had declined sharply. These datasets really showcase just how bad it would be for Japan and its businesses if China would restrict some materials or push boycotts. This is not the only problem here. One big problem has emerged as of late, and it's the fact that Japan is one of the most important allies to the United States. Since the start of the 21st century, there have been accusations and even trade disputes between the United States and China, placing Japan in a precarious position. As a strong ally of the US and an increasingly interdependent economic partner with China, Japan has often found itself caught in the middle of their trade wars, geopolitical rivalries, and ideological differences. Probably the most contentious problem as of late is semiconductors. According to various reports, the United States has placed restrictions on several key semiconductor exports to China. Here's a graph on the top 10 destinations for the US semiconductor exports. Here, you can see for the year 2021, China is the second highest destination. The implications of restricting semiconductors to China would then be disastrous, and that is because China is the world's largest consumer of semiconductors, accounting for a significant portion of the global demand for these critical components. They have been pushing to become global leaders in key industries like electric vehicles, lithium batteries, solar energy, and so on. Without advanced semiconductor chips, their lead in these key industries would likely falter. The reason why this is so important for Japan is because they have also gone on to restrict some semiconductor exports to China. This is arguably because they are a key US ally, which would put Japan under pressure to align with Washington's policies, including export restrictions on advanced semiconductor technologies to China. But of course, there are impacts for both Japanese businesses and potential impacts led by the Chinese government. So, should Japan try to decouple from China? Well, they have been looking into that. Many reports stated that Japan has been moving out their production from China and into other nations. As a matter of fact, there's even a program called China Exit, which was launched in 2020 to encourage Japanese companies to relocate their manufacturing bases from China to other countries or back to Japan. This program aims to strengthen Japan's economic security by mitigating risks associated with concentrated production in a single country. But despite this, Japan is still heavily reliant on China. Anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.